Second case is a patient with high hyperopia and also some amblyopia. How do we address this? So one of the questions people often ask is, how high can I go? So the first thing about that is you need to know your laser, and every laser has its own idiosyncratic behavior depending on how high you're going. We've heard Dan Reinstein's name earlier this evening with epithelium, and Dan routinely goes to +7, +8. I don't go that high. The highest I ever go is sort of +6, and most times not really much more than +4, but it's a very personal thing. So if you're going to start with hyperopia, start lower and slowly but surely go higher and higher and see at a point where you think you're not happy anymore. This is a very important sentence. Look at the final projected Ks and make sure that they are below 50, and even better, try and keep them below 48. How does that work? If you've got a +3 and your cornea is 43, the +3 is going to induce 3.6 diopters of steepening. So now your 43 cornea is going to go to 46.6. That's below 48. That's fine. And then epithelial mapping is very useful to inform you whether you can do a further enhancement if required. So here's a patient who's got a K of 44, the mean K, and here's a patient with a mean K of 41.2. So those two patients will have a different amount of hyperopia you can treat so that you don't go too steep. So always start with what is your starting K and what's your projected final K. And for hyperopia, you multiply by 1.2. For myopia, you multiply by 0.8. So it's less flattening that you get with myopia, much more steepening than the dioptric value. And this is a very, very useful map. If you have epithelial mapping, and this patient has already had a hyperopic LASIK, irrespective of the Ks, these Ks could be 43. And you're thinking, I need to do some more. If you look at your epithelial mapping and you see that the epithelium is already significantly thinner over the apex of the treatment, then it suggests you shouldn't be thinking too much about doing too much more, because you're going to get to a point where the central epithelium is simply too thin and you get a chronic breakdown. So in the old days, it used to be just about how steep you go, but today epithelial mapping helps you a lot to decide how steep you can go. Then obviously for hyperopia, it's mandatory to do cycloplegic refraction. You need to assess the effect on alignment if there's a big difference. With latent hyperopia, we would normally do 30 to 50% of the difference. So a +3 manifest, +5 cycler, we'd normally do a +4, maybe slightly less. And if you have a very big delta, a big latent hyperopia, then contact lens trials can be very, very useful. You need to explain latent hyperopia to your patient. They need to understand it. It takes a lot of time, but it saves you so much trouble down the line. What's very interesting is especially with latent hyperopia, even if you're undercorrecting the cycloplegic, you're going to, on the short term, you're going to get an overcorrection, and it's very important to explain this to patients. And here's a very nice trick that not everyone is aware of, but it really works well. If you've been hyperopic all your life, anytime you want to see well, you sort of squint and you stimulate accommodation. You're trying to get to see as well as you can. And that's the way you've been trained for 30 years, 40 years. And now suddenly you have a treatment done, and now for a while you're recovering it and the epithelial is remodeling, you're slightly myopic. And what do you do when you can't see? You induce accommodation, increasing the myopia, making it even worse. So what we tell patients in this recovery phase is you've got to stop doing that. What you've got to do when you're not seeing well, when the TV is a blur, close your eyes, just relax, let your vision relax, and then slowly open up and see. And often that helps them get through this initial phase where they're over-focusing. We'll also ask patients if they're happy with their current corrected vision, because the moment you do a high hyperope, you're going to get minification. Like with myopia, we get a lot of increase in best corrected acuity because of the magnification. You get the opposite with hyperopia. So more important to think about that. You're more inclined to have amblyopia. Does the patient who has amblyopia in one eye, do they wear both contact lenses? And if they do, what are they wearing the second lens for? Is it mostly for balance, for increasing the visual field? It's important to manage expectations. So sometimes the opportunity with amblyopia, one really ends up, it's you can also do the phoropter or the loose lens test. And then it's a very nice sentence that really makes them understand this. And you can tell them, you know, your whole life long, the one eye's been lazy. Now we're going to assign that eye for reading. So with I think your good eye is getting worse and worse for reading. Relatively speaking, the amblyopic eye now is starting to enjoy more of an advantage, and you can find it improves. And we normally do so often over the years. And that I'm very comfortable telling patients that. But for someone who's very pedantic or very demanding, I'll just say, look, it's work is when you start the market, you forgot to bring your and you're going to have to then close your dominant distance eye and read your so vision that's called the blended vision that's tricky, and they're trying to get the lazy eye working better. It's to help you with that. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you so much, Anas and Ahmed, for such a nice conference and for inviting me to participate. I've really enjoyed it and learned a lot so far. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arthur. As usual, I learned a lot from your presentation, and I like the term blended vision more than the monovision, because definitely it's scary for the patient that they will turn to one eye patient. I would like to ask you about the blended vision. Let's say, is it applicable for myopic patients? Do you do such blended vision for myopic patients, or do you have something to do with the Q value in these patients or not?
So those would be what we used to call advanced monovision, when you start playing with Q. You can do that, and we have some nice technologies that can help you with that. But mostly what I do, more often than not, is either with an IOL, if I'm doing blended vision rather than a multifocal, or with LASIK, is just this thing where you do the test, you give the person a stereo target, and then you see how far you can defocus them. And in the 8,000 or 9,000 cases we've done, I would reverse a blended vision or a monovision maybe once a year. So it's all about those patient expectations. And I think, the conversations we have today with patients about multifocal and trifocal IOLs, we've become quite good at explaining to patients we're going to improve their functionality. We're not promising them total freedom from glasses. And if you have that approach and you're simply telling someone you're going to make them more functional, you're almost always going to be super surprised on the positive side. I was a -3 in both eyes, and 10 years ago, I had this eye to 0, this eye to -150, and I've never looked back. So it works very well for myopes as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. One more question. Blended vision works with is anything to do with the right-handed steering wheel cars or the left-handed steering cars?
That's such a good question. It works very, very well. And so it's a question we have. The only time that comes up, though, is if a patient says, I can't tell the difference. So we do the testing for them and they're saying, I do it this way or that way. Then we'll ask them where they drive, because we have a lot of patients, even though they're Irish, they're living in Spain or whatever, and where they spend most of their time driving. And we drive on the left-hand side of the road. So we would then tend to the right eye for distance, or vice versa. So when my wife had this done, she's also right-hand dominant, and she obviously drives on the left-hand side of the road. But with her test, she much preferred her distance vision in her right eye from a sensory point of view, and she had it done that way around, and she has no problems driving at all. So be very flexible, but if you have the choice, better to have your distance eye closer to the white line.
Okay, thank you very much.
I have a question for Arthur, please, if you have time.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I have a question regarding correction of hyperopia. Do you experience some sort of improvement in near vision after correcting hyperopia? Sometimes the hyperpolate cornea after correction of hyperopia gives you some negative spherical aberrations that mimics the presbyopic treatment profile, and some patients are happy with near vision, although we don't promise them to correct the near vision, but we correct just the hyperopia for far. But some of them are reading fine after doing just hyperopic correction for far vision. Do you have the same experience, Arthur?
Yeah, absolutely. You're 100% right. And you're right about how it works as well. You induce negative spherical aberration. What's interesting with doing it with IOLs, if I have a patient who's decided not to go for a multifocal, but they rather want some kind of blended vision, they're a high hyperope. We always do the distance eye first. And every now and then, I'm guaranteeing you, all of you have seen this, is you do a high, maybe a +8 or so, you put in an emmetropic eye, or emmetropia, you happen to get emmetropia, you see the patient in the waiting room reading, and you're thinking, oh my goodness, I've got too much myopia here. And you find afterwards they can read and they can see far. And then you know when you treat the second eye for reading, you don't have to target -150, you can target something much less. And I think hyperopes are very interesting, is they tend to get with laser or with IOLs, they tend to get more reading than you bargain for. But again, we don't tell them up front. You always want to surprise them. You want to surprise them positively rather than negatively. Great questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.